again, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Alumni Chats, a weekly podcast featuring alumni from the Department of Broadcasting and Journalism here at Western Illinois University. My name is Buzz Hoon. I'm the host of the podcast. I'm also the interim dean for the College of Fine Arts and Communication. Today, I'm talking with Shaun Newell from the class of 2002, and it has been 20 years, and I cannot believe it, Shaun.
I know it is hard to believe. It seems like it was maybe 5 years ago. Let's go with that.
Yes. Yeah. It was a quick 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
So good to have you on the podcast.
Well, thanks. It's nice to see you again after all these decades.
After that, you mean that 5 years?
Yeah, exactly.
So tell everybody what's going on in your life. Let's get an update.
Sure. I currently live in Peoria, Illinois, and I am the vice president and general manager of WMBD-TV, owned by Nexstar Media Incorporated. So we're one of many stations across the country that they have. And I just got this job about 2 months ago. My career up until that point had been mostly based in news and from a lot of the stuff that I learned at Western and I just built off of.
Okay, well, we'll talk a little bit later about what it's like to be a vice president and a general manager and all those responsibilities. But let's start at the very beginning, because I always like to, I think it's interesting to find out when was the first time that you thought to yourself, I kind of like the idea of being in some area, maybe broadcasting journalism. When did you get an idea that you had an inclination in that area?
Sure. That would have been probably my sophomore or junior year in high school. There was a startup newspaper at the school called The Truth is what we named it. Okay. And I was on the inaugural first 2 years of it as a junior and senior in high school. And I also did the radio broadcast part of speech team. So that's kind of what got the thing of, this is kind of a fun thing to do, and writing the articles and asking the questions and doing everything that comes across as being a journalist. That's really the root of it, where that started from.
Okay. So you're from Franklin, Illinois. And
I am.
What was it like growing up, and what kind of things did you like to do even before you got to high school?
Sure. Franklin was a small town, 650 people. It's still there. I was just there this past weekend. And so I shouldn't put it in the past tense. It's just a little past tense for me at this point. But it was awesome to grow up in a small community. You knew everybody. You knew all your neighbors. You could stay home by yourself at a much younger age than you ever should, because it was a safe place to be. Neighbors watched out for you. You could ride your bike anywhere in the town. You had good friends, and just a nice, slow atmosphere to grow up in. And yeah, it was a great experience as a child there.
Do you think that because I tend to think that sometimes that community and the fact that you did know a lot of people and probably held accountable for, what you were doing, and mm-hmm. everybody knew you and your family and everything else. Do you think that carried on for years and years into your adulthood?
Oh, I would say so. I mean, yeah, when if you do something that you shouldn't be doing, it didn't take long for it to get back to mom and dad or grandma and grandpa, who also lived across town, and all of that stuff. So yeah, it does give you a sense of responsibility of, you can have fun, but do it within reason. And because everybody's watching you and watching out for you and taking care of you. There's no doubt about it. By the way, really quick, I'm going to flip the mic around to where I'm more comfortable, but you were from Jacksonville, right? Just 10 miles away. That's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah, very much so. And that's why, when we were talking beforehand, I mean, all these areas are very familiar, anywhere from Jacksonville to Springfield, mm-hmm. I claim in my knowledge area. And, I probably stopped in one of these areas along the way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about, at some point in high school, you're finding out that, you're interested in maybe working on a newspaper or, as you said, doing the radio part. But was there an expectation from your family that you were going to college? I always like to also think of that. Was this new for you?
It absolutely was. College for me, in most of my family, I was the first one that went to school. As a matter of fact, I did have a couple of uncles that went to Western, ironically, before me. But on one side of the family, I was the first person in the family that went to college and got a degree. So there was no expectation. And I think it was probably midway through my senior year, I was like, what am I going to do next year? It's like all of a sudden it hits you when you're not used to it, and it's not a normal thing in your family. You all of a sudden you kind of have to figure out what is next for me, and that was a difficult process to figure that out, because I didn't go straight from high school to Western. I took kind of a strange path, and actually, and this school's been in the news lately. But the first school I went to was Lincoln College in Lincoln, Illinois, and of course we just heard a couple of weeks ago that it's going to be most likely closing at the end of the semester. And then after that, I went to Lincoln Land for a couple of years, Lincoln Land Community College in Jacksonville and Springfield, and then transferred to Western when I was a little bit older. So it was not straight 18 years old from high school to WIU.
Was somebody encouraging you along the way to say, Shaun, you have the ability to do that, or was there a push to, why aren't you out there doing something else?
I think it was more of a, why aren't you out there doing something else? You're working at a local catering company in Franklin and doing stuff. And for me at that point, I was completely happy with the little money that I was making, and, I could make ends meet and all of that kind of stuff. And one day the light bulb went off that there is something bigger to do, and you need to get out of this small town. Not that the small town was bad, because it wasn't, but I finally just decided at one point I have to look beyond this and go do something else. And that's when I decided to go to Western.
Huh. That's interesting, because, to see where you are now over this stretch of time, sometimes I wonder what would happen, like in a movie, like if you had stayed within a small town for the rest of your life. I still imagine you would have been a successful person, because obviously you have displayed a work ethic and an interest in trying to do very good work. I mean, there's no doubt about that.
Well, and I think what got me out of the small town area was even after I graduated from Western. And I don't know if you wanted to jump this far, this quick, but after I graduated from Western, I started working at WLDS and WEAI radio in Jacksonville, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. And I was doing everything that I ever wanted to do. I was doing news, I was doing sports on the weekends, play-by-play and color commentary for football and basketball. It was great. And my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, fiance, was going to school at the University of Illinois, getting her master's degree after she had graduated from Western. And I was in Jacksonville, and we were getting married, and something had to give there, so she still had a year to go at the U of I. So what ended up happening was I started applying for some jobs and saying, I don't know that I really want to leave here, because I honestly liked WLDS and WEAI so much I could have made a career out of there and been, a big journalist in Jacksonville for my entire career, and been probably pretty happy with that. But I got a job at WMBD radio, no connection to WMBD-TV, by the way. And she, here in Peoria, she was still in Champaign. So we moved to Bloomington the first year that we were married, and we each drove opposite directions to make that work, and then moved to Peoria after that. So that's really why I actually left that area.
Right. And there are plenty of people in, like, for instance, Jacksonville, Illinois, that have worked for years and years and had very successful careers. And that's not unusual, for some people that, I've been here for 30 years. You just never know what's going to happen. But let's go back to WIU, because I want to talk about memories of different people, different faculty, classes that you enjoyed. Let's talk about WIU. When you decide to come here, what was the first thing you remember getting involved with?
I got involved with a lot of the broadcasting stuff, because I came in as essentially a junior, so it wasn't like I was starting out fresh and had to take all these gen eds and all of that kind of stuff. So I remember really getting involved, particularly because this is why I wanted to go into this business in the first place, with sports. So everybody can tell that story, I think, but because sports is what draws you there. But when you get there, you realize, it really is the journalism that you really need to learn to really be successful with it, and it makes you more successful in sports also. But anyway, I got very involved with and worked with you a lot on broadcasting basketball games and broadcasting football games and working at the Dog. Is the Dog still there, by the way? I'm pretty sure.
Dog is still there. Yeah,
88.3, doing shows on that, picking up shifts on that. That's really my first memories that I really remember, was getting involved with as many like extracurricular things that did count for class credit a lot of times, but it also was a lot of time not normally spent in the classroom out doing hands-on stuff. And I loved that stuff. That's the stuff I remember the most. Yeah.
And we were just at that period of time, we were just really expanding our coverage of sports. And I know that we tried to cover as many football games and many basketball games as we could. A lot of the people, the sports broadcasting program, I try to tell people, really originated from about 2000 to 2005, that period of time where we were trying to get, like you, a lot of young people that had that interest to try to develop a curricula would reflect and support a young person in that. But when you mentioned some of the students, when you, like, for instance, Rich Zath, who was, I think, one of the first young people I remember asking to do play-by-play, and Colby Curry. And of course, Colby came back and was teaching for us for a few years.
That's right. Yeah, that's awesome.
What other names do you remember from students you liked working with?
Oh, Dave Walker was a big one.
Oh, Dave Walker. Yeah,
Dave and I hung. Yeah, that's what I ran into him at a football game a few years ago. Yeah, it was great to see him after so many years. But John, who was Dave's roommate, John Glusick, I believe was his last name. They're all those guys were a lot of fun. It's actually funny that I remember also, and this is probably a name that you'll remember, Buzz, is Denise Molina, who I didn't know very well there, but she ended up working at the NPR station here in Peoria when I was working in commercial radio, and we got to know each other really well from that, and would talk about Western all the time and be like, I think we were in the same room when this was going on and didn't realize it. Libby Allison, another person that I ended up working with at WMBD-TV, a few years back, and we were there at the same time and didn't really know each other that well, but had a ton of stories and shared memories that we didn't even know that we shared until we got to talking about it. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah, there's something, and there are a number of our broadcasting alumni in the Peoria area that you, like you had mentioned, Renee Stetzer and Libby and so on, and you're all doing wonderful. So now you mentioned you were doing sports with me and Tom Durso. Yeah. And I think Tom started at that.
He started when I was there. Everett was the previous
Everett
guy.
Nelson was.
He retired, and Tom came on, I think, the last year that I was there. So yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So we were just getting that sports program going, and of course, some of the other faculty people that you mentioned was Dr. Roger Sadler.
Yes. I loved Roger. I still talk to him. We still send notes back and forth here and there. I sent him a note yesterday saying I was probably going to talk about him on this today. And I loved to call him the Doctor of Rock because he had that show on I can't remember what the radio station was.
WJQ.
And it was a classic rock station. And I think he just did it just to keep his toe in the water, which was great. and they would always be like, and now the Doctor of Rock, Roger Sadler. And I had always called him the Doctor of Rock. I thought it was hilarious. But I sat in Roger's office so much, I probably annoyed him to no end, but he was a great influence on me. There was no doubt about it.
Well, I can tell you this, that he loved having students in his office. So there was no way you were annoying to him. He loved every semester a new batch of people that would come in and find that connection with him and sit on his couch and eat his pretzels and talk about things, whether it was news or law, because he was teaching law as well. A lot of students benefited from his tutelage.
Well, he wrote a broadcast law book that I think still stands up pretty well today, if I remember right.
So, he sure did.
Yeah. The other thing too about him was that I did a kind of a independent study with him the last year I was there. I needed 1 credit hour to graduate. And it's like, you're not going to stay for an extra semester for 1 credit hour. So I did an independent study with him where he was working on a project where he was writing these kind of these things like Pumping Up Campus. It was called Spotlight on Campus. And they were pretty in-depth. They were like 4-minute long radio pieces, essentially, is what they were. And I would go around and interview people for him and get the sound bites for it and write the scripts, and he would tweak them. But that actually helped me become a pretty decent writer, because when you're writing a 4-minute radio script, that's actually a pretty big commitment. And that was actually one of the best classes that I took in terms of developing writing skills that I ever had at Western.
Wow, I did not know that. That's pretty neat. That's good. So, and as you mentioned, did you meet your wife here as well?
She is actually from the same town that I'm from, but she's a couple of years younger than me. And we got to know each other really well at Western and hit it off and developed a relationship there. And and I proposed to her in front of Sherman Hall. So that was a cool memory. And a lot of our big memories of really getting to know each other was on Western's campus. So, and she's a professor at Bradley University now.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
What a great success story. Now, because I think you mentioned something, if I remember right, that you, even when you come back, you still like to visit some of the old places that you would have, for instance, dinner at. And
I loved the Parkside. I know it's not called that anymore. Yeah. You probably know the name of it now. I know it's still some
sports corner.
Related. Yeah. So last fall we came back for the football game against ISU, which was actually a great game. Western was way down in that game and fought their way back and ended up winning the game. It was spectacular, but brought my 8-year-old and 5-year-old, and we went to the sports corner for lunch, and it doesn't really look that much different inside. The one difference that I did notice, though, is the restrooms are no longer marked Leathernecks and Westerwinds like they used to for men and women. But no, it was fun to go back, and the food was still great, and it was a cool atmosphere still.
What do the kids think about when you and your wife talk about the times of being in Macomb?
They probably don't pay too much attention, to be honest. They're too little to really understand it. But my son really enjoyed the football game last year. So I think he's a Leatherneck fan. So that's a good thing.
That's very good. So as you mentioned, your first job was in Jacksonville, Illinois. You're working in news. You do some play-by-play and getting your career started. As you mentioned, I think there's something very valuable about that very first job that you have after you graduate. What other memory do you have from that experience?
I think the best part of it was just learning how government worked. I know that sounds so boring to some people, but the first time when you step out as a news person, as a journalist, you don't know what a TIF district is, a tax increment financing district. You don't know how budgets work. I mean, these are things that you're not going to learn in college. It's just there's not enough time to teach all of that stuff. You're trying to teach people how to write, how to ask questions, do all of that kind of stuff. And really, I loved covering the South Jacksonville Village Board, which sounds so boring probably to a lot of people, but that was my beat. And I learned so much by covering that small little village just outside of Jacksonville, and then would cover Jacksonville City Council and District 117 school board and all of that kind of stuff. And that's really what made me be able to understand A, how to ask questions, but B, how to ask uncomfortable questions sometimes, because it is hard to sit and ask somebody a criticism of themselves, but you have to do it as a journalist, and you have to be able to do it in a respectful way to where you don't want to play gotcha with people, but you want to ask respectful, good, hard questions. And that is something that is learned after, getting some experience doing it.
Right. Because I think that especially in news, you move into this period where you have to know something about everything. Mm-hmm. You may not have to know it inside out, but you have to have and you have to have the ability to ask, some reasonably good questions about those topics to be able to then communicate that information to the audience. I mean, that's your job. So there's, I think, a real benefit of having that first job in a small market to where you learn all those kind of skills that you then are kind of putting in your tool belt that you take on.
Mm-hmm. I think that the other thing is there's no dumb questions. If you don't understand something, you need to ask, because it will reflect in your story that you didn't know it, or you'll get something wrong in your story that you'll get criticism for, or even, if it's bad enough, you could literally set the station you work for up for a lawsuit. And that's so important to not do that. Make sure all of your I's are dotted, your T's are crossed, and all of that kind of stuff. And that's why, I remember talking to the mayor of South Jacksonville one night, and they were talking about setting up a TIF district. And I always talk TIF districts because it was so hard to wrap my head around at that young age. And I remember saying to him, I do not understand this. And he was nice enough to stand there for 20 minutes and go over with me what a TIF district is. Now, not every politician is going to be that nice to do that, but it doesn't hurt to ask, because generally speaking, they want you to get that story right too. So they don't have to be asked questions by constituents of things that you got wrong that actually wasn't wrong in the first place.
Well, that's some really sound advice. And so after a few years there, as you said, you moved to Peoria.
I did, yes.
WMDD. And Is that where you became eventually news director?
I did. Yeah, I was there for about a year and a half as a reporter and anchor, and then worked my way up. And I was news director there for, I'd say, 5.5 years. So leading a department of, there was only three of us. It wasn't a big news department or anything, but we covered 4 counties. And I'd say we did it pretty well with such a small staff.
Right. You're still responsible in guiding other people. And I think that's something that, at some point in time, you must have said to yourself when you had this opportunity to say, is this something I want to take on, which is the responsibility of other people? Did you come to a realization that, yeah, I'm okay with that?
Yeah, I did. It was kind of one of those things to where I was even in high school at a younger age working a minimum wage job. It was something where I was thrust into a leadership role at a young age, and I got kind of used to it, and to the point where I got to where I liked it. It was just easier to be the leader and have the responsibility than to rely on somebody else to get things right. I would rather rely on myself to get it right or get it wrong, but then it was my responsibility, and I also wasn't nervous about taking the consequences if I did get something wrong.
So after you're working in radio, at some point in time, you also then did you transition into television?
I did. After I got done at WMBD radio, I decided there was two things going on. I decided I wanted to explore some other opportunities outside of radio.
Okay.
So I started taking classes before I left WMBD at night to work on getting a master's in business administration through Bradley. So I was doing that, and then I realized this is too much to try to do both things, because radio, and I'm sure there's a lot of other alumni that are going to hear this that'll relate, that worked in a radio newsroom. You're never off. You literally work to keep all of that stuff up and keep the news going. You're working 55 to 60 hours a week in the building. And I'm glad I didn't have kids then, because I don't know how I would have managed that. So that's just how much you're in the building, not how much you're checking email and all of that stuff from home and updating websites and doing all of that stuff. But finally something had to give. And I was like, I really want to pursue a career in, some sort of, I was working on a marketing emphasis, and I thought, maybe a marketing and communications director, something like that, which did end up coming true a little bit down the road. But so I decided I was going to go back to school. And I turned in my notice, and I was on the shelf for about a month and a half. And WEEK-TV, the news director there, called me and said, we have an assignment manager opening, and former radio guys typically make really good assignment managers, and we'd really like you to come work for us. And I said, well, can you balance me going to school also? Because I was taking night classes primarily. And he said, yes, we'll work around your school schedule. So I took the job and got into television that way, and started being the assignment manager at WEEK and WHOI TV.
Well, that's such a amazing in terms of the responsibilities that I know graduate school can put on a person, as well as working a full-time job. And you're trying to, as you say, not be consumed by news, which is very easy to happen.
It is.
And so you must have at some point been able to balance both of those responsibilities, because you got the degree.
I did. I got the degree in 2013, about a year and a half after I got to 25, and then that worked out great. And it was a lot of work. I mean, but it was also right before my wife and I had children, so it worked out to where what you would normally have as free time, you just spent going to school
or sleep time,
that kind of thing. Yeah, exactly. But it was great. I mean, met a lot of great people at Bradley that I still talk to today through that program that are local. I mean, because it was mostly people that had already established careers that were going back to get that extra degree for whatever reason that they wanted to. So it was really worth all the effort, no doubt about it.
So it eventually led, as you mentioned, that you had an opportunity to become a marketing communications director at the Center for Prevention of Abuse in Peoria.
Yes.
So what kind of things, you're now shifting into a different part of your career. What kind of things were you learning, and how were you growing in that job?
That was a great job. And I didn't work there all that long, but it wasn't because the job wasn't great. It was just because this opportunity came up. But it was basically making people understand the services that were there for people that were victims of domestic violence or sexual assault or sexual abuse or bullying in school or, elderly abuse, so many different things. And it was making sure that the message was getting out to the community that these services are here and you need to take advantage of them if you're a victim of one of these things. I mean, one of the programs was even helping people that had been offenders on the other side of it, that had been the person that had committed the domestic violence or whatever, putting them through a program to help them rehabilitate, to learn ways to cope and not lash out violently about issues and stuff. So all the way around, such a great program to make the community a better place to live and work, no doubt about it.
Wow. And so how long were you there?
I was there about a year and 8 months, year and 9 months, something like that. Wasn't too long. And then the news director job here at WMBD-TV popped up. And we also have WIZZ, which is the Fox affiliate here in town. And it was just one of those things to where I didn't get news completely out of my system. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to say that I did, but I didn't. And I thought, you know what? It wouldn't hurt to just send off a resume and, an application for it. And then I started talking to the general manager here and I couldn't pass it up. I just had to say I was a television news director and that I was leading a newsroom full of 35 people and that we were working to make the community a better place to live and work. As I just mentioned, it's very important to me that whatever job I'm doing, that it's something that's benefiting the community. I don't just want to do a run-of-the-mill job that, is just, helping a company become more successful. I want it to benefit where I live. And this job as news director was one that I very much could do that. And so I took the job in February of 2017 and just wrapped up doing that about 2 months ago.
So let's talk about what it's like to be a news director, because I'm sure that a lot of our current students are wondering, as they begin their career, mm-hmm. if that's something down the road that they want to pursue. What are the challenges and the joys of being a news director?
The biggest joy is the adrenaline that it gives you when you have a big story that impacts people's lives. And in a good way, some of it's going to be in a bad way. Everybody always hears the media is negative and all of that stuff. I've really tried to set this newsroom up not to be negative. Our brand for the station is Central Illinois Proud. And we really try to live up to that. And we'll talk about if there's a murder locally or a homicide, we will talk about not only the fact that it happened, but what are police doing for the solution side of it? Because what I've learned in this business is people want to hear the bad stuff that's going on, but they also want to hear what's being done to make it better. And if you can tell them both things, they're going to appreciate your newscast a lot more than if they don't. So that's probably the thing that the biggest benefit is just impacting people's lives locally. The challenge, of course, is managing 35 people and staying full staff, and once you get somebody trained in a small market like this, the first thing that they're going to do after they've been here for 18 months or 2 years, they're going to go to a bigger market where they can make more money and grow and all this stuff. And I don't blame them for that. I encourage them to do that. But the challenge is, okay, well, now I've got this new person that just came out of college again. And now we start the whole cycle all over again. So that honestly, it's awesome to do that and to help shape and mold people, but it's also the biggest challenge, hands down.
Yeah, I was going to say, sounds very much like teaching, Shaun.
Yeah,
absolutely. As soon as you get used to somebody and you have them, I mean, it's like a senior. Mm-hmm. As soon as they, are doing wonderful things like you were doing, then it's like you're graduating and I'll never see you again for 20 years.
Yeah, exactly. I have said many, many a time that I feel like we are an extension of the broadcast schools and the journalism schools. Absolutely. Because as much as they can learn at a place like Western, and I had a great experience there and learned a lot, you don't understand what a real newsroom's like until you work in a real newsroom. Those deadlines are hard. I mean, you don't have 3 or 4 days to work on that special story that you're working on, finding the ghost in Simpkins Hall or, whatever it is. I'm sure you've had that story 50 times, but you only have so many minutes. It's minutes sometimes to get a story on the air, and those deadlines are tight and it's stressful. News is a great thing to get your blood pumping, but at times it is very stressful and can overwhelm you. There's no doubt about it.
I was going to ask you, the immediacy, I mean, it certainly in radio and television, there was always, the importance of having news delivered right away. There's no doubt about that. But, now there's an expectation that you can find out news through social media, or, you need to have, people are used to having it. Is that one of the biggest obstacles or things that you have to deal with in news in general, is trying to make sure that you're getting it accurate and you're getting it to the people as soon as you can?
Yeah, I did think that at one point. I'm used to it now, so I don't feel that it's as much of an obstacle as it used to be. Now I look at it as a benefit to get our product out there faster. But my rule in the newsroom was always, and the new news director is following this rule as well, is you want to be first when you can, but you want to make sure that you're always accurate. And there are times when something will get typed wrong or something like that, and you have to issue a retraction. But we do pride ourselves on let's be right before we're first, and a lot of times we're both. So that works out pretty well.
And since you have to deal with so many young reporters, is there something, a message that you have to tell them a little bit about being professionals, or the fact that how they deliver content or their presence on social media, for instance, because it's so important, to their persona?
Absolutely. Especially if you put together a professional page, you want to make sure that what you post on that professional page reflects who you want to be seen as. On your personal page, if you keep it locked down and you keep it private, that's your business. But yeah, you gotta be careful and not to post something that somebody can make it seem like you're giving an opinion on something, because as a news person, you want to make sure that you're as down the middle as possible, and especially in this day and age where everybody thinks that journalists aren't down the middle. That's something that I push even harder, is we will stay down the middle and we will see both sides of issues and all of that stuff, because local news is the only thing that people still trust on a regular basis, I think. And we want to make sure that we don't blow that trust up here at the local level.
Yeah, so important. It's so important. Before we move to your current job, let's kind of finish up with news in terms of what kind of people have you met or stories that you covered that you think at some point the kids, when you tell stories to your kids, that you're going to say, I want to tell you that this is what Dad remembers from his time as, in news?
Oh, hands down, two things, hands down. And I put this in the thing that I sent you back. And the first is the day that President George W. Bush visited Peoria. It was the coldest day that you could ever imagine, in January of 2007. It was right after he gave the State of the Union address. And then Congressman Ray LaHood, who represented this area, brought him here to speak and give a speech at Caterpillar in East Peoria. And I got picked to be part of the press pool for it. So had to get there out to the Peoria airport, to the Air Force base out there. And, we watched Air Force One land, and you had to stand under the wing, and then you all get in these vans and you're in the president's motorcade all day, and you're going around, and the President Bush stopped at a place called the Sterling Family Restaurant on Sterling Avenue in Peoria. It just got torn down about a year ago. And went and visited people, and we got to watch him visit with people and talk to civilians who happened to be in there eating breakfast and all of that stuff. And then it was back in the van, and it was off to Caterpillar. Stood there, watched him give the speech, got back in the vans, went back to the airport, saw him take off. It was the coolest day that I could ever imagine. And I thought, man, that'll never happen again. Well, lo and behold, 2 years later, the next year, President Bush came back to campaign for Aaron Schock, who was running for Congress at the time. Got to ride in the motorcade again. Joe Biden came here as vice president. I got to do it again. I just couldn't believe how many opportunities there were to get to do that stuff in Peoria, Illinois. You wouldn't think that stuff like that would happen in a town this size, but we got very busy on presidential visits for a few years there. So easily the coolest thing. And then the other thing was the Bradley basketball team made a run to the Sweet 16 in 2006. They upset Pittsburgh and Kansas in the NCAA tournament, and they went out to Oakland to play in the Golden State Warriors arena in the Sweet 16. And I got to go out there and cover it from a radio perspective, and got to sit courtside and watch the Sweet 16. And that was the game. And Buzz, I know you're a big sports fan, so you may remember this. Adam Morrison played for Gonzaga at the time. Right. That was the game where Gonzaga lost to UCLA on a last-minute shot, and Morrison collapsed and cried at midcourt. I got to sit side court and watch him cry and weep because they lost the game. It was the coolest thing ever. So yeah,
Sorry
those are the
for
two
him.
biggest standouts. Yeah. But I'll always remember it though.
No, that's those are some cool things that, I think you're right. You will share those kind of memories with your kids and say, this is what I remember from that period of time. And it was a special kind of thing when you think about a young guy from Franklin, Illinois, getting this, to meet a president and to see these politicians and to have those kind of things. It's pretty neat.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the current job, because I think that, moving into, again, to this higher type of administration, being a GM, taking on that responsibility seems to be in your DNA. As you had mentioned, that you were always kind of weren't afraid for that challenge. And I'm going to say it certainly has got to be a day-to-day challenge. And yet you feel that, this is something that you're just growing towards.
Yeah, I didn't necessarily expect that this was my career path. I thought maybe it would be news director in a bigger market, but I really didn't want to leave Peoria. I've lived here now for 17 years, and I like it here. It's home now. I mean, as much as we talked about Franklin and Jacksonville and all of that stuff, you live somewhere for 17 years, it really feels like home. My kids are now 8 and 5. My oldest one is in second grade. My youngest one's going into kindergarten next year. They're getting friends. They're getting settled in. My wife is very established at Bradley, like I said earlier. And it just didn't feel like, as you're a news director anywhere, you get to a certain point and it's like, I've kind of done what I can do with this current newsroom. And I was starting to think of what's next. And then my boss said he was going to retire at the end of the year. And I thought, that's what I want to go for. And so I applied and got through the interview process and was successful. But I think I really started learning how to do this role about a year and a half ago when he started talking about retirement. And I just started trying to learn things from him and learn more things about sales and more things about creative services and engineering and stuff to set myself up for success if I did end up being able to apply for the job and get the job. Because really, if you want to do a role like this, I think you just have to understand all the aspects of the organization. And I'm not saying that I completely understand every single thing about the sales department, but I set myself up to where I can at least speak knowledgeably about it. And now I'm learning even more, obviously, in this role as I work with all the other departments, closely now in this new VP and GM role. But I think that's it, is if you want to do things beyond what box that you're in, you have to diversify yourself. And diversifying yourself doesn't mean necessarily just flat out applying for the job. It means start gaining the knowledge that you need to get way ahead of time to set yourself up for success.
When you talk about having to step out of your comfort area a little bit and growing, I'm wondering also, I would imagine that your role with the station means that you need to be connected with the community that you now are, you're saying that you feel very connected with.
Absolutely. And being in news for so long, I knew most of the people already, and those who I didn't know, I'm setting up meetings with all the time, and hey, let's do lunch or let's meet at a chamber event and talk for a little while and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, and that's so important, I think, to just, if you want somebody to believe in your product, you have to believe in your product too, and go out and talk about it and say, we really are Central Illinois proud, and here's how we're doing it, stuff like that. And people like that when you're genuine with them like that, and they like when you're enthusiastic about what you're talking about. So that's honestly my favorite part so far is talking to people and just saying, this is what we're doing every day to try to better the community that we live in.
Yeah, I think it's very much in what I'm doing as well, Shaun, is that we both are trying to lift up all the people that are working with us along the way. I feel very much in the fact that with students and faculty and the staff that here at WIU and the same at your station, we're trying to find ways that everyone can continue to succeed and feel that they're part of a successful venture.
That's great. Yeah. I mean, just that camaraderie and that sense of community just goes such a long ways.
So, and I appreciate that you've been able to share your journey so far, Shaun. I'm wondering if you could share some advice for a student that, like yourself, may have had an interest at some point in time, thought, well, maybe I can be a storyteller. Maybe I have the ability at some point to be in news or be in production, or I have this love of sports like you had when you came at WIU. What kind of advice do you have for a young person?
Soak it all up, learn it all. learn every single thing that you can do there. I mean, learn the sports, learn the journalism, learn the news writing, learn producing, directing, all of it. And then you can really figure out where my path wants to go. Don't put yourself in a box, as I mentioned that earlier. Make sure that you're looking at a very broad perspective, because you never know what job's going to pop up. When I graduated from Western, I thought that I would take a job in television working behind the scenes. That's really where I thought that I would start. And the job in Jacksonville at WLDS happened to pop open at just the right time, and I needed a job, and so I took it. And I totally took my path in a totally different direction than what I thought. But don't be afraid to do something that you didn't expect, because you might learn a whole lot in that. And if you're interested at all in producing, be a producer, because producers are really hard to find, and you can work your way up from WMBD to a big market in a really, really big hurry and make lots of money doing it. Producing and storytelling from that perspective are so important to this business. And so many people just want to have their face on the camera, and don't necessarily settle to say, I want to be a reporter, or I want to be an anchor. Be a producer, be a director, be whatever it is that can get you to that next level, because there's a lot of stuff out there that you can do in this industry. So don't limit yourself.
Well, that's some great advice. And I can tell you, Shaun, I'm proud of you. And I know you're a proud Leatherneck, because you have already mentioned about how you still come back to WIU and bring your family as well. I hope that next time I will be able to see you at some football game.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I hope you have continued success and just continue to grow personally and professionally.
Well, thank you so much. This has been really a great experience to catch up with you, Buzz, and just to hear a little bit about what's going on over at Western as well. So this has been a lot of fun.
And thanks to all those that continue to listen and watch and support the podcast. I definitely appreciate that. Thanks to Shaun for being on a guest on today's podcast. If you are interested in being a guest on the podcast or want to recommend someone, just send me an email. We want to hear from our alums, and we hope that you continue and listen and appreciate everyone's support. So until next week, stay safe, take care, and God bless.